G'day to David Elliott, not only the member for Bookervilles and one of our proud Western Sydney MPs in the Berejiklian government, but importantly, Minister for Police and Emergency Services. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Mate, Bankstown boy. You and Paul Keating did dissimilar political paths, but of humble Bankstown origins, and then school at Regent's Park. You've come a long way.
Well, actually, Keating and I probably aren't that different if you look at the modern left and right of arc of politics. He was more right-wing than half the Liberal Party, and I just sit nicely in the centre of the Liberal Party. But, yeah, it was an interesting time to grow up in Bankstown in the 70s and 80s. My state member was a guy named Neville Rand, and my federal member was a bloke named Paul Keating. And even though I ended up in the Liberal Party, both my grandfathers were shop stewards in their respective unions. In fact, one of my grandfathers came from an old mining family in Cessnock. So I certainly knew my way around the Labor movement, but tragically for your side of politics, Chris, I chose the blue team.
You're the one that got away in your classic social progression to the Hills District, the dress circle of Western Sydney.
Right.
To be its member. Mate, said a keen interest in politics that you had as a kid. I always find it interesting when people say they don't have a keen interest in politics as a kid. People like you and I were, to whom it came natural and interesting. Time on the staff of both Bronwyn Bishop and Parramatta, and then your Prime Minister Emeritus John Howard within. But importantly, unlike a lot of pollies, active service in the military. You are a modern military gentleman of sorts. So what's tougher? The army or the bear pit?
There's a lot, people say when you leave the military, the further the distance between your service life and your modern times, the fonder the memories you have of it. And I do look back at my time in the military with a great deal of affection, but at the time there were some pretty tough periods. I mean, I was running some the media for our peacekeeping operation in Bougainville. For 6 months, which was tough, not only because it was a difficult place to live because of the poverty and the civil war, but the separation from your family for that length of time is pretty tough. And of course, it was a lead up to the East Timor deployment where there was a little bit of anxiety amongst our troops, not knowing what they were going in for. And I'm reminding on the weekend that with the Black Hawk disaster, I think that was probably one of the first big jobs I was involved in as a young army officer. So it was good fun, and I'm encouraging my sons to get involved if through Army Reserve or cadets, or both of them have been through the cadets. It's a great way for a young bloke to get advantage. I use the military for my benefit. I got a scholarship for them to put me through my master's degree, which as you know, working class kids from Bankstown were supposed to go to university, let alone get a master's degree. But thanks to Gough Whitlam and the University of Western Sydney, I got that. And thanks to the Army's education scheme, I got to do a master's degree there too.
Closest I got was fighting with kids from King's School at the bus stop in the afternoon, trying to steal their military uniforms and their hats. It was a very Burnside public thing to do. Such as life across the many various parts of Western Sydney. Mate, you do represent part of, I always have a bit of a joke, having grown up in sort of Dundas, Carlingford, so-called the Frontier Wars, where the North Parramatta sign was moved 8 times in 2 years along Pennant Hills Road between King's School and Tara, because people thought if they were in Carlingford, they were on the North Shore. I've often asked people in Mossman, do they think the Hills District's the North Shore, and they have a very different view. But in a serious sense, the Hills District, sort of effectively took itself out of Western Sydney just about the time Western Sydney took off, and watching come back closer ever since. Effectively you're the central city and the GSC's 3 cities, the Hills and Parramatta. But where do you see the Hills District as it's part of those vexed questions within Greater Western Sydney?
Well, I mean, I'm biased because I was born in Western Sydney. I went to school in Western Sydney. Went to University of Western Sydney. My wife and I got married in Western Sydney. Even half of my military service was at Holsworthy. Either the 5th Brigade or wherever. So I'm enshrined into Western Sydney. But like I like your North Parramatta analogy because I grew up in Picnic Point. Now we were in Bankstown. Picnic points are Bankstown, a suburb of Bankstown. But sometimes if you went down to Fitzpatrick Park for a picnic and told people you lived in Bankstown, they'd slap you on the face. So they didn't like to be reminded that they were in the city of Bankstown.
It locally. Ray Hadley told me last week on air I was Oakland's, not Dundas anyway. So I said,
it's funny. But I certainly consider my electorate as Western Sydney. Kellyville is Western Sydney, Box Hill is Western Sydney. Most of my electorate from time to time has included suburbs like Old Toongabbie and Northmead, and I've currently got obviously Balcombe Hills, and so I certainly, and I consider Norwest Business Park a part of Western Sydney. And I think, with the exception of a few people who are geographically challenged, if you put a line down the centre of the Hills Shire and went right down to the south of Sydney, you would easily be able to identify every single suburb along that line as being Western Sydney. Having said that, it is a slightly different demographic, but there's a lot of different demographics in Western Sydney, and that's what people don't understand. But from a political point of view, when you and I were growing up, if somebody said they were a Liberal MP in Western Sydney, you'd giggle that they've been smoking the stuff the Greens want to legalise. But I've always used to say that Western Sydney, I'm always highlighting now that Western Sydney's got more Liberal seats than the North Shore has.
You were part of a phenomenon which I suppose John Howard started with his blue-collar conservatives. Barry O'Farrell certainly tapped into. He didn't look like a Tory from Central Castor. He looked like an accountant from the Hills District, and to his credit, together with probably a Maronite Lebanese community, there was a coming together, and it just became this new coalition, which in my world made it marginal and new beauty.
Absolutely, it did. And you know what happened, Chris? The University of Western Sydney had a lot to do with that, because he told us that the University of Western Sydney, which Gough Whitlam initiated, told us Westies, you're entitled to an education, you're entitled to a tertiary education, you go out there and be aspirational. Now, I know I've got some Labor MPs who get in my ear and say the problem is when you're progressive to the working class, they become middle class. That's where they only progress to the middle class, which doesn't really suit the Labor cause. But it's true. And now you've got, and you go to Western Sydney, it's actually quite a small C conservative campus. I'm not saying it's politically conservative, but everybody there wants to finish their degree and get on with life.
They're also working. They're not chalking revolutionary slogans on city buildings. They're not working for a living.
Exactly right. They're working, and I found that even as far back as 30 years ago when I was there, there was I don't remember a protest at University of Western Sydney at Bankstown when I was there. I don't think there was one, but I'll tell you what, we all had our assignments in on time.
It's kind of embarrassing. When I was on the board, 8 years on the Western Sydney Uni board, we had to try and set up the student union for the students. So the bosses were sponsoring the establishment of the union. It was quite, it was old lefties turning in their grave at the very thought. Chancellor parking his car in the public car park, never being scratched, nothing. Your coppers never had to come on campus. It's a shameful situation. Mate, in addition to having a military background and a spin doctor, the third part of your political training was to be an industry advocate, or a lobbyist, as we get called. The tourism industry, where you and I first really came to know each other, and then later in the infrastructure sector, like me. You've had a stint about tourism and infrastructure before everything else. What did that teach you now as people knock on your door on a regular basis, your ministerial career? What did it teach you? I'll take some notes here. How did it teach you to be a good advocate? Is it those who come with solutions, not just problems? Is it how do you rate it?
Yeah. Well, that's a fair point. I mean, I always ask people when they come in, what's the end result? Because I knew whenever I was advocating the government on behalf of the hotel industry or the construction fraternity, we wanted to know. We didn't want to go to them and say this is a problem. We wanted to go to them. Can you fix this? Can you find this solution, or can we come to this solution? Well, the first one is anybody that believes. Government, I suppose the first lesson I learned is government gets things wrong regularly. I got things wrong when I was in the tourism industry. I certainly got things wrong when I was in the construction industry. And even though there's been a change of government since that time, not much has changed. So I actually love to challenge the bureaucracy and even the cabinet, because I draw on my experience with particularly those medium-sized businesses that we need so much across the New South Wales economy. I'm very sympathetic to staff challenges. I'm very sympathetic when when business leaders come to me and say we've got an issue with training, or we've got an issue with recruitment, or particularly we've got an issue with retention. That's always been a touchstone issue for me, because working in the hotel industry, and nothing has changed even with COVID. In the 20 years, I could still identify a dozen hoteliers in this city that will Shanghai chefs who are walking past the front door. I still can tell you people in the construction industry that are so frustrated because ticketed qualified tradies will swap employers for as little as 50 cents an hour, and they don't even bother talking to their boss. Oh, the boss's Christmas party this year was no good, so I'm being offered an extra $1,000 a year over the road, so I'll go over the road. Well, I mean, so retention is a big burden, I think, in the New South Wales, particularly in the Sydney economy. And I'm a big advocate for a decentralisation, whether that's getting people, out of the CBD into Western Sydney, or indeed, I'm delighted that we will continue. I think you and I will, until our last breath on this earth, will continue to advocate things like fast trains and better motorways, because I can tell you it's made a big difference to my electorate. North Connect, so I can get to the Central Coast beaches within an hour.
Well, the government's announcing some money today for the light rail to Olympic Park. One of the earlier plans was also a light rail to the Hills District from Parramatta. Yeah. Is it still viable? Are you still punching away? Do you think one might come up to Bookervilles from Parramatta?
I was always a fan, and I always kept it as Plan B for the Northwest Rail, which I think was Bob Carr's original. But I think that the Metro, the way that it's being designed at the moment, is going to be is exactly what we need. It will take even more and more traffic off the road. We're upgrading again, or we have upgraded again, Old Windsor Road.
It still does see taking the hills to the city, doesn't it? I don't think transport planners are fully cotton on the fact that Parramatta's executive class lives in the Hills District, and it's still too hard to get between the two.
That's true. That's very true. And, we've got to encourage them to probably use public transport a bit more, the executive class. When I was a CEO, I used public transport a lot. And I don't know why CEOs seem to think that, unless they need their car during the day, I don't know why they have to drive 5 days a week. I'm a big fan of the Metro. I think it's good for our tourism industry, because people are more likely to stay around for the city to have a drink afterwards, or they're more likely to, particularly it's every 4 minutes, so they know that they're not going to be constrained by time. And I think all these things are going to make Western Sydney, particularly the northwest of Sydney, a lot more of an attractive place. But listen, I'd expect my two sons are teenagers, and one's at uni, one will hopefully go to uni next year. I would expect them at some stage in their working life to either work at Norwest Business Park, Macquarie, or at Parramatta, because I would think they're going to be of that generation that, if I can't afford to live in Glebe, well, then I'm going to bring my employment to
Glebe to the hills. God help them. What we're still driving for is we call it the Central Metro, the Hurstville, Cogra, Bankstown, Parramatta Hills District. There ought to be. We just don't have enough north-south connections in the city. It's always been east-west, radial, never north-south. So, and the Northwest Metro is the first one to really. Though it's still centred to the city, it allows that alignment.
Yeah.
You said governments get things wrong. I can't not mention we had a session last week with your colleague Minister Pavey on water and dams, and you were an outspoken voice during the dam issue. We've just been through the recent floods. Did government get it wrong there? Are you comfortable with where they're heading with flood? You're a local member for the floodplain of northwest Sydney, the lower parts of it.
Yeah. I think Stuart Ayres is going in the right direction on this. What frustrated me with that whole debate, and I got it slightly misquoted, you'll be surprised to hear. They claimed that I was only talking the increasing the size of the wall of the dam so that I could develop my electorate. Well, as you know, that's not my intent. My view was always they're coming to me and saying, we can't, we're not going to release water ahead of the flood because the dam wasn't used for mitigation. It's only used for storage. Well, it doesn't mean it can't be used for both. That's my view was that. And
it will be. It will be with the.
And it will be. And this is why. And this is why. And it was frustrating for me, of course, as a Western Sydney dad, having those water restrictions, knowing full well that we're at 97% and a lot more was coming. So if you want to get rid of
the slip and slide going, don't you?
That's right, exactly. And I said that because tell my neighbours they're allowed to hose down the house and the driveway, and you'll get rid of a fair bit of water. And not only that, you'll be making money from it because you'll be selling it. Sydney Water can't cry poor mouth while they've got unnecessary restrictions. If you want to make money, you sell your product. And that wasn't being done.
Congratulations on bringing, we had, with your help, your Resilience Commissioner, Shane Fitzsimmons, come on to speak. I only mused to at the time how Scott Morrison's life would have been different had he made him straight into the year in January. Not great
yes.
I thought he or Brendan Murphy were a lock. But it's a great, and I'm glad you've put him back to work and kept Shane in, because what a remarkable role he played in that resilience role. Mate, I've got to ask you, the Minister for Police and Emergency Services, you were the Minister for Counter-Terrorism. A couple in Western Sydney. I hate to admit, my mother grew up in Merrylands, that sleepy little hollow just southwest of Parramatta. Let me tell you, Merrylands isn't today what it was back in the day. Yeah. How do we as a community, and we've got to be honest enough to admit all the great things in Western Sydney. We have way too much gun crime, way too much organised crime. We're unfortunately the national capital for domestic violence. There's a whole range of social issues we need to address, many of which just come with being in some pockets, maybe not so much in the hills, other parts of lower socioeconomic background. What keeps you awake at night as a Western Sydney MP relating to crime and the causes of crime across Western Sydney?
Well, on a whole, crime rates are going down, and that's because we've got a very, very good police force. We've got 1,500 more police coming in over the course of this parliamentary term, and we've got record investments into things like IT and diversionary programs. But let's look at the dark side. Well, Western Sydney has got a high level of reported domestic violence. Okay. And the beauty about it is that Western Sydney families are now more likely to report it, whereas there are some pockets, well-heeled pockets. Yeah, where there are some areas around the city where we know there's lots of domestic violence, but because the women are too scared about leaving their wedded bliss, they won't report it. Now, we've done a lot of work with ethnic communities, particularly migrant women, to remind them what their rights are in Australia, and they're reporting it, and it's been fantastic. Unfortunately, sometimes it's met with violence, and I'll be making some comments about some future rewards for ethnic women that have been victims of domestic violence that have unfortunately been victims of homicide as a result of that, and that's tragic. But I think what's keeping me awake at night as far as domestic violence is making sure that every woman knows what her rights are and what the community expectations of a domestic relationship in Australia is. Unfortunately, Chris, particularly in Western Sydney, but it's all over the state, there is an increase in cybercrime, increase in fraud. More and more of us are relying on e-commerce, and more of us people continue to be gullible when it comes to
doing shopkeepers that are on the information superhighway.
Yeah, it's terrible. That's terrible. What is even worse is when elderly Australians will take the phone call or will receive the email and just assume they give their credit card over, the bank account number over, and their password will then somehow some Nigerian prince is going to dump $1 billion into their account. And we've got to my late father rang me one day saying, I've got to pay the tax via a whole bunch of Woolworths vouchers. And I said, why? Because somebody called him up and said, you've got to provide us, your $2,000 debt to the tax office. We can accept Woolworths gift cards. You can imagine the conversation that I had with him about that. So they're two issues. But mate, what I've got to do is make sure that the new police force reflects the community. And so there are a number of ethnic groups that we're really, really encouraging to join, because sometimes back in the nations the countries that they've come from, the cultures they've come from, being a member of the police force isn't a respected profession. They're quite scared of the police force
or trusting of police.
That's right. So and if you go there'll be a passing out parade on Friday at the academy, and I reckon you'll probably find about 20% of them, 30% of them would probably have very solid second language, if not English being their second language, but it hasn't stopped the quality of people coming through the academy.
Are you comfortable? I noticed that recent global success we've had as part of the using cybercrime against those. It's not a crime when you do it, which is great. Are we condemned to a perennial sort of bikie crime culture across particular parts of Southwest Sydney? Are you getting in front of it, do you think?
I think Raptor, Strikeforce Raptor, and what we saw with Ironside in the last couple of weeks. I mean, a lot of the intel that we led to the arrest in the last week, particularly what you're seeing on the front page of the papers at the moment, a lot of that came from the FBI, who have been monitoring from the genesis of these drugs in Colombia. And the Five Eyes that we've got with the United States and Canada and New Zealand and the United Kingdom at the moment has never worked better. And it is assisting us right down to local domestic crime in suburban Sydney. The intel that we're getting is from those international agencies that and intelligence groups has benefited us right down to the local command level. So, and even though I often say to them, the criminals are just getting so much smarter, I'm very confident that our law enforcement agencies are staying on top of them. And when the book's written about Ironside, what we've seen in the last month, when you hear about how long this has been going on, how detailed the intelligence, how well the FBI monitored the transactions and the threats and the risks, completely anonymously and also completely oblivious to the people that were actually trying to do the wrong thing. That's an extraordinary story, and it's proof that the intelligence agencies, but just as I say to everybody in Parliament, if they can monitor the drug, if the FBI can monitor drug dealers in Western Sydney, just assume that every phone conversation you're having is being listened to.
This one particularly. Well, we're hoping it's listened to a lot when it goes online. I'm just a simple boy from Parramatta, but I reckon guy without a job driving a Lamborghini is probably worth a good look. I don't know.
And it's frustrating for a lot of people in Western Sydney because unexplained wealth is something that Westies are very conscious of. They're saying, why? How come there's a $2 million renovation going to that house at Guildford, and why is he driving a Porsche these days? Because I went to school with him at Marylands West, and I don't remember him going to university and becoming a neurosurgeon. So it's a big issue for us in Western Sydney, because
we're used to unexplained wealth in the eastern suburbs, but it's a new phenomenon in the west with him. But I've got to let you go back and keep the state safe. We're getting close to being able to say this could be the Earl's year or at least decade. Been a long wait since '86.
Well, we are a lot further advanced this year than we have been in previous years. I like everybody, I got a bit spooked and over the last 2 or 3 weeks, but I was very comfortable with our result on the weekend against the Tigers. So, mate, we've got a brand new stadium. It needs a brand new trophy.
And I think there's going to be a brand new centre of excellence, hopefully up in the Hills District too.
We're looking forward to that too.
Which will be wonderful. David Elliott, Minister for Keeping Us Safe and Minister for the Northwest Floodplain. Thanks for your time today, mate. Go well.
Thanks, Brownie.